him. Better to see the progress he was making with his nails. It's a pity you didn't come here to debate. And it's also a pity that you're so entirely preoccupied with your toilet now. Why should my toilet bother you? Chopping off 100 million heads is as difficult as reforming the world through propaganda. In fact, even more difficult, particularly if we're dealing with Russia, Laputin risked once more. Russia's their main hope, though, an officer remarked. Yes, we've heard about Russia's being their main hope, the lame teacher said, throwing himself into the fray again. We know that a mysterious finger is pointing at our beautiful land as the country best fitted to perform the great task. Just one thing. I'd personally feel I'd be getting something out of a gradual solution of the problem through propaganda. At least it'd give me a pretext to chat a bit. Then I might be rewarded by the government for my efforts in trying to enlighten the masses and promote social progress. But what would I personally get out of a quick solution with 100 million heads rolling? If I started spreading that kind of propaganda, they might even cut my tongue out for me. They certainly will cut yours out, Verkovensky said. Well then, you can see for yourself that under the most favorable circumstances, that sort of butchery couldn't be completed in less than 50 or at the very least, say 30 years after all. People are not sheep. They won't let themselves be butchered just like that. Wouldn't it be better to pick up one's belongings and immigrate somewhere across the ocean to some quiet islands and there close your eyes to everything and live in peace? Believe me, he tapped his finger meaningfully on the table. The only result of your sort of propaganda will be immigration, nothing else. He looked very pleased as he finished his speech. Laputin was smiling perfidiously. Virginsky had been listening to the discussion with a mournful expression. All the rest had followed the argument with the utmost attention, particularly the ladies and the officers. They had all seen very clearly that the advocate of chopping off 100 million heads had been backed against the wall, and they were waiting to see how he would react. I must say, you put it very well, Verkovensky said, sounding even more indifferent, even more bored than before. It's a good idea for them to immigrate. But still, if, despite all the obvious disadvantages that you predict, more and more people volunteer to fight for the cause, I suppose we can manage all right without you. You see, my good man, we have a new religion to replace the old one. That's why we have so many volunteers and are able to operate on a grand scale. But go ahead. Go ahead and immigrate. I would, however, advise Dresden rather than those remote, peaceful islands in the ocean, because in the first place, Dresden is a city that has never had an epidemic, and a civilized person like you is sure to be afraid of death. In the second place, it is near the Russian border, and you would be able to receive your income quickly from your beloved mother country. And in the third place, Dresden possesses many so-called art treasures, and you must be a man with aesthetic tastes, for if I remember correctly, you were formerly a teacher of literature. And finally, Dresden contains its own pocket Switzerland that would provide inspiration for your poetic vagaries, because I'm sure you're quite handy at composing verse. In short, Dresden is a sort of treasure store and a tobacco pouch. There was a general stir, especially among the army officers. In another moment, everyone would have been talking at the same time, but the lame teacher rose irritably to the bait. No, we may yet decide not to abandon the common cause just like that. You mustn't reckon on it, sir. Would you be willing to become a member of a five, then, if I offered it to you? Verkovensky barked out, putting the scissors down on the table. A shudder seemed to pass through everyone in the assembly. The mystery man apparently had come out into the open at last. He even publicly mentioned the word five. An honorable man doesn't shrink from work for the common cause, the lame teacher said, trying to wriggle out of it. But, no, sir. Try to do without any buts. Verkovensky interrupted him sharply and imperiously. I declare, ladies and gentlemen, that I must have a plain answer. I understand very well that in coming here and in having asked you to meet in this place, I owe you some explanation, he said, thus making another surprise announcement. But I can't explain anything until I know the nature of your opinions. Skipping discussion, because we surely don't want to have another 30 years of tongue wagging such as we've had for the past 30 years. I ask you, what you prefer. Do you want the slow solution of writing social novels and preordaining human destiny bureaucratically on paper for thousands of years in advance, while the tyrants, meanwhile, snatch the juicy morsels that were destined for your mouths? Or are you for a quick solution, whatever it may consist of, which will finally enable men to organize their society themselves, not just on paper, but in real life? Some people shout about those 100 million heads that must roll, although after all, that may be nothing but a metaphor. Anyway, why should we shrink from it when we think that, within 100 years or so, tyranny is bound to devour not 100 million, but 500 million? Note also that an incurable patient cannot be cured, whatever you prescribe for him on paper. On the contrary, if we delay much longer, he will be so pestiferous that it'll end up by infecting us and all the fresh forces that today we can still rely upon, so that in the end everything will fail. I fully agree that it's extremely pleasant to wag one's tongue eloquently and expostulate about liberalism, whereas action in its behalf may hurt. Well, anyway, I'm not good at speaking. I've come here to inform you of a few things, so I would ask this worthy company not to vote, really, but simply to tell me what you prefer. To keep plodding through this quagmire at a snail's pace, or to go across it full steam ahead as quickly as possible. I'm for going full steam ahead, the schoolboy shouted rapturously. Me too, Limeshin chimed in. There's no question about what one should choose, an officer muttered, and his statement was approved by another officer and by someone else. Verkovensky's announcement that he had some communications to make had really struck home. They were hoping he would make them then and there. I can see, ladies and gentlemen, that your answer is in the spirit of the proclamation, Peter said, looking around the assembly. Yes, yes, all of us, most voices confirmed. I admit I would have preferred the humanitarian solution, the major said. But since it's the way everyone feels, I guess I'll go along too. So it appears you're not against it either, Verkovensky said to the lame teacher. I'm not, actually, the lame man muttered, blushing. But if I agree with the rest at this time, it's only not to upset the unanimity. So that's the way you are. First, you argue for months for the sake of exercising your liberal eloquence, and then you vote along with the rest. But wait! I suggest that every one of you first think again whether he's really prepared for whatever may come. For what were they supposed to be prepared? It was a vague question, but how intriguing. Of course we're all prepared, people declared on all sides, although many sidelong glances were cast around. But maybe you'll be angry with yourselves later for accepting so quickly. That's what always happens with you people. They grew agitated in various ways. The lame teacher pounced on Verkovensky again. I wish to point out to you, however, that answers to such questions are, as a rule, subject to certain conditions. Even if we have consented, you must still keep in mind that a question asked in such a strange way, what strange way? Not in the way such questions are usually asked. Please explain what you mean. And by the way, I was sure you'd be the first to feel resentful because you'd accepted too readily. You have squeezed this declaration of our readiness for immediate action out of us, but what right did you have to act this way? Who authorized you to ask us such questions? You should have worried about that a bit earlier. Why did you answer? Now, after you've accepted it, it suddenly occurs to you. But In my opinion, the casual frankness of your main question suggests that you really had neither the authority nor the right to ask it and did so just to satisfy your own curiosity. What are you driving at? Verkovensky cried, apparently alarmed. What I'm driving at is this. New members are recruited in secret, not publicly, before a gathering of 20 unknown people, the lame teacher barked. Getting this off his chest had put him into a real turmoil. Verkovensky, pretending alarm, looked over the company. Ladies and gentlemen, I consider it my duty to inform you that this is all bunk. Our talk has led us too far afield. I haven't recruited anyone yet, and no one has the right to say that I am recruiting. We were simply discussing opinions. Isn't that right? But whether it's right or not, your attitude worries me, he said once again, turning toward the lame teacher. I never imagined that such innocent matters had to be discussed only in private here. But perhaps you're afraid that someone here may inform on the rest? Is it really possible that there might be an informer among us now? There was a general commotion as everyone talked at once. If there were an informer here, Verkovensky went on, I've compromised myself more than any of you. So I suggest you answer the following question. That's if you wish to answer it. I leave it up to you entirely. What question? What is it? It's a question that will make it clear whether there is any point in our remaining together or whether we should immediately take our hats and each go his own way. Well, what's the question? If each of us knew that plans for a political murder were afoot, would he, foreseeing all the consequences of it, go and inform, or would he stay quiet at home, ready to face the consequences come what might? Opinions on this subject may differ, and the answer to my question will tell us whether we should part or remain together. And I don't mean for tonight only. So allow me to address the question to you first. Peter turned toward the lame man. Why must I be first? Because it was you who started it all, and please don't try to dodge it. Your agility won't help you here. However, it's really up to you to answer or not. I hope you'll excuse me if I say that your question is really rather insulting. Couldn't you be a bit more precise? I've never been a stool pigeon yet, my good sir, the teacher said, wriggling more than ever. Please be more explicit. You're holding us up. The lame teacher became so irritated that he stopped answering his tormentor and simply glared at him from under his glasses. Yes or no? Would you inform or not? Verkovensky shouted. I certainly wouldn't inform, the teacher shouted even louder. And no one would inform, of course not. No one would, many voices shouted. Allow me to address you now, Major. Would you inform or not? Verkovensky went on. And I want you to note that I have deliberately picked you this time. I wouldn't inform, sir. But suppose you knew that someone intended to kill and rob someone else, some ordinary mortal. You would turn him in, wouldn't you? Certainly, but in that case it would be a matter of civic duty. Whereas before we were dealing with political denunciation. I've never yet been a stool pigeon, sir. None of us has ever been a stool pigeon, voices rose again. It's just a waste of time to ask such a question. We all have the same answer for you. There aren't any stoolies among us. Why is this man getting up? The girl student cried suddenly in surprise. That's Shatov, Mrs. Virginsky told her. Why have you risen, Shatov? Shatov was standing up. He had his cap in his hand and was looking straight at Verkovensky. He apparently wanted to say something to him, but hesitated. His face was pale and angry, but he controlled himself and, without saying a word, walked across the room toward the door. Shatov, don't you realize that it's to your disadvantage to act like this? Verkovensky shouted after him, hinting at something. But then it's to your advantage, you low schemer, you traitor, Shatov shouted at him from the doorway. Then he left. Considerable agitation followed, and many voices rose. "So you see, that tested him," someone said. "It did come in handy," a voice agreed. "Isn't it too late now, though? Who invited him? Why was he received? Who is this Shatov? Will he inform on us or not?" Questions poured in from all sides. "If he really were an informer, he'd have kept quiet, but it looked as if he couldn't care less. He just walked out." "And here's Stavrogin getting up too. Stavrogin hasn't answered the question either," the student called out. Stavrogin really had stood up, and, at the opposite end of the table, Kirilov had risen too. "Just a moment, Mr. Stavrogin," the mistress of the house said, addressing him sharply. "All of us here have answered that question, and here you're leaving without saying anything. Well?" "I see no need to answer it," Stavrogin mumbled. "But we have compromised ourselves, and you haven't," someone shouted. "And what do I care if you have?" Stavrogin laughed, but his eyes were flashing. "What do you mean?" voices cried, and several men leaped up from their seats. "Wait, gentlemen, wait!" the lame teacher screamed. "Remember that Mr. Verkovensky himself didn't answer the question. He only asked it." The remark had a spectacular effect. Stavrogin laughed unrestrainedly at the lame man's words and left, followed by Kirilov. Verkovensky followed them into the hall. "What are you doing to me?" he muttered, grabbing Stavrogin's hand and gripping it as hard as he could in his own. Without saying a word, Stavrogin broke his grip. "Be at Kirilov's. I'll come there. I must... Absolutely. There's absolutely no necessity as far as I'm concerned," Stavrogin cut him sharply. "Stavrogin will be there," Kirilov said to settle matters. "Stavrogin, it is necessary for you to be there. You'll see why when we get there." And they left.